Howdy. All right. Ah, there you are. Hello. Hello, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Perfect.
Can you hear me? Ah, I can hear you too.
Yay.
Yeah. Can you see me?
I can see you. Yeah. Can you see me?
Yes. I'm still trying to figure this thing out. So, and actually, just so you know, we are live right now, but there's nobody watching, as you can see on the top of the screen there. See, it says 0.
No, I don't see that.
Huh.
I see the chat. I see live comments and private comments, but it doesn't show me like how many people are actually watching.
Oh, well, maybe it doesn't show you that, but it will show you the chat. I guess it shows me that. So there's nobody in there. Oh, there's one person in there now. So there's one person. But yeah, so I can quickly, I tried it. I got scared because it just said, oh, you got to get on Facebook before your show starts or something. And I just clicked it and I was like, oh man, why'd I do that? Because we could do a little chatting before it got started, but it doesn't matter, just like we're in a live place where everyone's sitting in front of us and we're all chatting away. So there's a button here, which I can give you, do you have slides?
Yeah.
Okay. That I could give you, you could take the control of it.
Okay.
Do you see that on there? I can't see yours. I don't know what it says, but.
It says share screen.
Yeah. So you can do that. Try it real quick and just see what happens.
Okay. Sharing screen is the easiest on 2 monitors. Okay.
And then when you talk, I'm going to go away. So I'll go away like that.
Okay. Oh, perfect.
And I can't talk to you when I'm.
Okay. So you
can't. But when I come back, I can. Yeah. And then when people comment, in here, if someone's out there, they can comment. Whoever's out there, and then I can throw it up on the screen. Wait, I'll go comment, and it's kind of cool.
The other thing too is if I don't see a comment because I'm talking away and you just want to come on and interject and be like, oh, hey, this person asked a question, Heather, can you answer it? That would be great too, because that'll,
Okay, that was going to be my question. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Back to you. Okay. So, I just put a comment in there. Oh, wait. So then I would add you to the screen here. Oh, wow.
Look at that. It's like a mirror effect.
So that.
Perfect.
So that's your screen. Yeah. Ooh, that is weird, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll put that away now. So when you do it, when you get started, then I'll just click this and then I'll go away.
Okay. And I'll present.
And then it's just you, or I can stay or whatever. And then this is, I can show the thing. So here's I just commented in there in the YouTube, and that's what happens.
Okay.
Can you see that right away? You can.
Yeah. Yeah. It pops right up for me.
So do you want me just to pop in question? I mean, you'll be able to see the questions too.
Yeah.
So
as long as there's just not a ton of them coming, but I mean, it looks
no. But you can kind of, if you want to look at it, because you can look at it and go, hey, Mike, throw that up on the thing. I will be sitting here.
Right.
I might, if my 3-year-old runs in here, I might have to run her out of here. So if I don't respond right away, I probably run out to get the kids out of here or something. So, but that won't happen. Probably. Yeah. Anyway. So how are you?
Cool. I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, good. I mean, this is also crazy, all this stuff. So, as you know,
it's totally crazy. But it's also, it's like, I feel like I'm in this weird world because I've been working remotely for 4 years. So it doesn't really feel different to me.
Exactly.
But the rest of the world is different. And I would say, obviously, the biggest difference is that, even though I work by myself on video all the time, at the end of the day, I get to go out to a restaurant or go meet up with friends or,
right.
So I think I just miss people. I'm like, I just want to talk, I just want to go out to dinner or just go to somebody's house or hang out.
Yeah,
or,
I know. I feel the exact same way. I feel the same way. And just also in our neighborhood, I go out with my daughter, walk around, and I'll tell her, don't go near my neighbor who they're really good friends and their kids. There's like kids everywhere and we're trying to keep them apart. So that's the hard, been really hard.
Yeah.
Do you have little kids?
I have 8 and 11, so
8 and
they're
11. Well, so
little-ish.
yeah, the 8 is right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, trying to do all the homeschool stuff has been interesting, of course, too. But you know,
yeah.
I don't know. It's all so unpredictable. But podcast listening was up last week, so that's a positive. I
Oh,
don't know if
that's
you
good.
saw that,
Yeah,
but
that's
yeah,
very good. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
that
yeah.
is good. Because
You
I was a
think it
little
would
nervous
be?
that it was down for a while. Because I
Well,
think people
people.
were like out of their routines.
Yeah, yeah. And then the
So
podcast they love, they will listen to. Like I've missed a lot of mine, but I've been working in the
mhm.
yard a ton, so it's like my house is going to look fantastic when this thing ends because I've been doing so much work on it. Like I won't even go into it, but just crazy nice. Um,
uh,
but I listen to podcasts while I'm doing that. I bought
yeah.
these little earbud things that are just so nice.
Huh? What brand are those?
I don't remember what they're called. Hold on.
I
They
have
are
my
called.
AirPods that I love.
Yeah, I was gonna get those, but then I got these are called B-Bens.
Huh?
B-Ben, can you read that?
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the little charger thing that it comes in. It's really this charges it.
Oh,
So when you take them off, it charges. It's
that's
anyway.
awesome.
I just wanted to get something else because I always had I wanted to get the AirPods, but then I was just like they're so expensive and I know I'm gonna lose them. And then these
Right.
were pretty expensive too. I think no. And then I bought a pair for my wife, so she's wearing them too, which is great.
It's I feel like when you go to those Bluetooth headphones like that, it's like to me as a podcast listener, or even like I listen to a ton of audiobooks too, and I walk a lot, and it's just
Yeah,
been amazing.
yeah.
I just love it. It's so convenient. And one of the things I really like about the AirPods is I can have one in and not the other. And then like if I'm doing the dishes or whatever, like if a kid comes up and asks me a question, I can
Yes.
still hear them. And then the minute you take it out, it pauses your audio, which is really
Oh,
cool. So
wow. I wonder if mine does that. I haven't tried that.
I love it because you could take it out, it pauses the audio, and then as soon as you put it back in, it starts again. If
Very cool.
they're out for too long, I mean, there's probably like a setting for how long it's out of your ear that makes it stop the audio. But yeah, it's pretty. They're amazing. I really love them.
Yeah, I was gonna get them when I got these. I don't know why. I was.
Yeah. Well, now they have the noise canceling ones, but I don't know if I want noise canceling. I feel like I kind of like to hear what's going on around me.
I do too, and I wear one of them when I go. We bought this electric bike, and I ride around in the hills of Oakland, and I just put one in, like I hear. So
Yeah.
anyway,
How is everything in Oakland with the coronavirus? I haven't heard too much about San Francisco. Is it bad or not really?
no, people are pretty good locking
Mhm.
down. It's been pretty crazy. My wife and I drove over to San Francisco last week just as a car ride, just to go do something,
Mhm.
and we drove over there, drove around the city like all because we lived over there before we moved to Oakland, and we drove around all our old houses that we had, and then we came here back, and it was 2 hours, which normally would take you like an hour to get across the bridge,
Oh,
But
really? It was more
yeah,
crowded.
no, no, no,
Oh,
normally it would take you an
oh,
hour to
I
get over there, but
see.
we
So
went
the
over there and
whole
around the whole city
trip
and
only took
home.
2
Yeah, it
hours.
was 2 hours. It's like we were like, holy crap, this is crazy,
Yeah.
you know. And we live 8 miles from downtown San Francisco, and it could take you an hour or more to get there.
That is
Like
insane. But the
I know.
BART goes over there, right? So do you just take the BART?
Yeah, you take the BART. Yeah, but yeah, you do. I always take the BART if I have to go over. I don't like
Yeah.
going to the city at all anymore, so I rarely go over unless I have to. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I keep bugging my husband to move to a city. I'm like, I just want to live in a city. It's so much more fun. And then, all of this happened, and I was like, maybe I
Yeah,
don't want to live in a city
yeah.
after all.
We live in Morro Bay, right?
hmm
Yeah, I love it down there.
It's beautiful. It's just really small town, and I just
Yeah,
I
I
get stir
almost got a
crazy.
job down there,
Oh,
and
really?
I was on the firefighter list. I was a fireman.
Oh, cool. That's neat. Yeah, I actually have an office in San Luis Obispo that I go into, and it's just like a one-room office, and I like that because it just at least gets me out of the same place. So, uh-oh, Mike, did you go away?
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
away. Sorry, it bumped me off. Okay, so
is it 7 o'clock?
Like getting close to 7. So do you want to test this with your slides, or you already think that's gonna be fine?
Yeah, I can test my slides real quick just to make sure. So you can see my screen, right?
Yeah, fine.
Right now. So there we go.
That looks great. Yeah, that looks great.
Perfect. So I guess that's the one thing, though, is when I'm doing this, I can't see because I'll be presenting, so it takes up the whole screen, so I can't see the comments.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay.
Right.
So I can pop them in if you want. That I'll just pop them in. Okay. You want me to pop them in, or we can wait to the end?
I mean, it depends. I feel like, I'm just going to talk through the whole kind of journey of getting podcast advertisers. And then I said I would talk a lot about dynamic ad insertion because I feel like there's a lot to say. So the other thing is that I can stop kind of after each section and be like, hey, does anybody have any questions? And
I can also stay in here too.
Okay.
I mean, if you want, and then I can.
Yeah, I mean, if I can hear you, actually, it's kind of nice if I can hear you because then you could just interject with a question. Maybe let's just do that.
Okay. And then I could laugh and stuff. So you'll feel like.
There you go. So I feel like I'm not talking to myself.
Yeah, I hate that. I've done a couple of webinars where I'm like just talking to myself in here. I'm like, but then I'll say, I'm uncomfortable with it. Anyway.
I'm pretty good at talking to myself. I do it all the time. So, hey.
All right. So, okay. It's 7. Okay. So this is all recorded basically on YouTube and on Facebook. And so I have a lot of these sessions all recorded from all kinds of people from all sorts of, 99%, the Kitchen Sisters, all kinds of people have spoken. I have all these recorded that I need to do a podcast with them all. So I probably will rip the audio and make a podcast out of it. I keep saying that, but I haven't had time to do it. I need to do it. Yeah. But okay, so let's get started. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. So first I wanted to say welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, Heather. I know you are very busy. Trying to do these every Tuesday now. We've been doing them. It's kind of fun because we did them all around the Bay Area. We started doing them, just so you know, I don't know if you knew this, but we're doing them in Silicon Valley, Oakland, Sacramento, and then we were gonna start doing them in San Francisco too. They already have a group in San Francisco, but we were going to do it there too, just because you can have more than one group. There's so many people into podcasting these days. So that's what we're up to. So then when this all happened, it just switched them all online. So I think it's just fun. And I do like the Zoom. We have a Zoom meetings once a month too, and that's kind of fun. People just come in and chat. It's nice. I'm not sure how many people will come on here, obviously, because you never know, but it's nice that people can watch it later.
Absolutely.
There's a couple of things. A couple of milestones happened for people that sent me this. I sent out an email to the whole list of people and asked what's going on. And Diana Levy, who spoke before to the group, Generation Cult is a podcast that she's been doing. She had her last episode last Wednesday. She did 2 seasons, and it was about people who grew up at cults, which was really interesting. And she also spoke when I said she spoke, and she spoke about with Laura May. They both have these podcasts, and their whole theme was interviewing for difficult situations, and it was pretty interesting stuff. So that is, I asked her if she's going to do another podcast. She's not sure, but it was a lot of work, I know, for hers. And then Esteban Cabrera's podcast is about to hit a milestone. He does the Mixed Bag podcast. He's come to a lot of our meetings. His podcast is currently at 98,061 official downloads. I also post to sites that do not contribute to official numbers. So I expect it to hit 100,000 downloads in the next few days, which is pretty cool. So good for Esteban. And that's the milestones that people send me. So I'm glad you were here to hear that, Heather.
Excellent. Those are amazing milestones.
Yes. Oh, and there he is. There he is right there. Look. This is him.
Nice. Congratulations. Yeah. That's awesome.
Esteban. Yes. So awesome. And see, this is right there, flipped on. Okay. So then, Heather, let's get to you. So I took your bio from your website. I hope that's okay. I know you probably will introduce yourself, but I thought I'd just shoot it out here really quick because I thought it sounded perfect. Heather Osgood started her career in advertising sales and quickly learned the valuable lessons in what it meant to be a business owner. Since the beginning of her career, Heather has owned, operated, and sold several highly successful businesses. Additionally, she has served as a business coach to hundreds of small business owners. With a background in radio advertising and a love for podcasting, Heather was in the unique position to start an agency that could help both advertisers get better results as well as assist podcasters in finding sponsors. She founded True Native Media in January of 2016 with the hopes of helping everyone find a bigger piece of the advertising pie, and acquired JK Media Agency in the fall of 2017 to further those goals. Heather, great job. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about podcast advertising, one of my very favorite topics.
Yeah, and we've seen each other a couple times at these events, but it's funny we don't live that far away, but that seems to happen. You see people that might live 3 blocks away, but you see them in Florida or wherever they are.
Exactly. See them in a totally different state on the other side of the country.
Yeah. We've been talking about we're going to do a conference here in the Bay Area.
That would be amazing. If you guys do that, I'll definitely come because I'm only like 3.5, 4 hours from the Bay Area.
Yeah. You want to come to San Francisco? You just said that. Maybe not to live, but you could.
Well, a lot of fun up there.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see how this whole thing shakes out.
Right.
But anyway, so thank you. I will give you. You want this? You want the stage? I'll give you the stage. You want it?
Yeah, absolutely. I always want the stage. Awesome. Well, let me just start by kind of telling you guys a little bit about myself. Obviously Mike read the kind of my bio and what I've been up to in my career, but I have a love for podcast advertising, and I founded True Native Media about 4 years ago. And I founded the agency because I saw that there were lots of, podcasts that were larger, that were being represented, that had no problems getting advertisers. But then I looked around at everybody else and I thought, gosh, there's all these shows that aren't being represented, and why is that, and how can I help them? Because of my ad sales background, I knew that I had the opportunity to help other people get advertisers on their show. So it's been an absolute dream. I love working in the podcast industry. I feel like it has been definitely the pinnacle of my career so far to be able to work with podcasters and just watch the podcast industry grow and develop. And, I know we're all in kind of a bizarre place right now with COVID-19, but the cool thing about podcasts is that they continue to grow. And I feel like even in this time, people are at home and they do have an opportunity to listen to podcasts. And I also think that people who have always wanted to start a podcast maybe are given the opportunity now to start that show that they're interested in. And so tonight I'm going to talk about, really creating successful podcast ad campaigns for your shows, how to get those up and running. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about dynamic ad insertion because it's really a big passion of mine. And I really think that it can be a little complicated and I want to make sure everybody understands it. Without further ado, I'll go through this. Any other questions from you, Mike?
No, please go ahead. I'll pop in. If people have questions, I'll just throw them up there and you can answer them if you want.
Perfect. That sounds great.
You can say no too. Take it away.
Perfect. So I just wanted to start kind of with a preview of what I was going to be covering tonight. So first, I'm going to talk about your hosting provider and why that's really important to advertising. I'm going to talk about understanding your numbers, preparing your podcast for advertising. As I mentioned, kind of diving into the difference between dynamically inserted ads and evergreen or embedded ads. And then we'll touch on pricing your podcast, creating your media kit, and outreach. So it's a lot to cover, but I think that we definitely can get through it. And so first, I wanted to talk a little bit about why your hosting provider really matters. A lot of times when I talk to podcast hosts, they will say things like, I'll say, well, who's your hosting provider? And most people know who their hosting provider is. But a lot of times they'll say, oh, well, is it this person? Oh, yeah, it's that person. And I feel like sometimes it can feel a bit like an afterthought. When you are creating a website, we're in the process of redoing our website at True Native right now. And we selected a new hosting company for our website. And the truth of the matter is it's kind of one of those set it and forget it kind of things sometimes, especially with websites. It's a little different with podcasts because we're interfacing with that, hosting provider a lot, going in and uploading our episodes and looking at our numbers and stuff. But I just really want to emphasize the importance of having a quality hosting provider. There are lots of companies that are seeing the opportunities in podcasts and kind of jumping on the bandwagon. And not to say that any of those startup companies are bad or that you shouldn't choose them. I just really think it's important that you do your homework before you commit your show to a hosting provider. Once you are several episodes in, if you've been podcasting for a couple of years and you have hundreds of episodes, trying to switch hosting providers can be a bit cumbersome. So realize that your hosting provider is the hub of your show, right? So if you don't have a quality hosting provider, what, can you rely on? So that's really important. And then the other thing is that your hosting provider is going to give you the analytics that you need. And when we're looking at selling advertising, analytics are super important. And some podcast hosting providers provide you with very minimal information, right? Like we at True Native Media deal with a lot of different hosting providers because we don't require podcasts switch their hosting provider to work with us. I was pulling stats this last week for an advertiser, and one of the hosting providers we work with only gives you like the top 3 countries that your shows listen to. And so you can see, oh yeah, maybe I'm listened to in the US and Canada and Australia, and then a whole bunch of other countries. And I don't even know what those are, right? So depending on the analytics that your hosting provider gives you, that can make a big difference in your ability to sell ads. And then the third and most important element is if the hosting provider is IAB compliant. So IAB is the Interactive Advertising Bureau. They're kind of like a watchdog for the advertising world. And a few years back, they came up with standards of how to measure a download. At the time, downloads were not being counted accurately. They found that a lot of times podcasts get progressively downloaded, and maybe a longer show might be downloaded in 4 or 5 parts, and that was registering as 4 or 5 listeners. So obviously that's a huge deal, right? If you are not working with a hosting provider that's IAB compliant, it will really affect your numbers, and it can artificially inflate them. And the worst thing as a host or as a podcaster is to think, oh man, I'm getting 10,000 listeners. And then you switch hosting providers and all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's actually 2,000 or it's actually 3,000, right? So nobody wants to take that big hit. And more independent advertisers and especially agencies are really only wanting to work with hosting providers that are IAB compliant. So make sure that that is something that you look for when you are looking at your hosting provider. And then the next question I don't have listed on here, which we'll dive in a little bit more, is do they have dynamic ad insertion capability? Because even if you're not interested in dynamic ad insertion at this moment, if you're starting your show and you know that you would like to eventually go to dynamic ad insertion, if you start with a hosting provider that can do that for you, then you don't have to switch. You just have to upgrade when it comes time to make that change. So any questions about that? Yeah.
I have a question. Yeah. So do you have to upload your show differently than if you go with one of those companies that provide dynamic ad insertion?
Nope. It's all the same.
Okay. So, then there's a question from somebody else. DM asks, does Libsyn pass the sniff test?
Libsyn does pass the sniff test. So yes. There's a handful of companies that are not only IAB compliant, but IAB certified, and Libsyn is IAB certified. So, yep. And Libsyn also does provide dynamic ad insertion. So you can start out with the basic level and then upgrade to dynamic insertion when you're ready.
Cool. And then the Sleep With Me podcast, Drew says dynamic is great. So
excellent.
All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear those comments. So next we have understanding your numbers. So I feel like when I have attended conferences and when I've spoken individually to podcasters, people not understanding their numbers is one of the biggest issues that I see. And what happens a lot is that you'll talk to somebody and they'll say, oh, well, I'm getting 20,000 downloads or a month, or I've gotten 1 million downloads total on my podcast. And while that is amazing, and you should be super, super proud of yourself, it's also important for you to realize what matters to the advertiser. So when we're talking about embedded ad reads, it's important that you only look at how many downloads you're getting per episode in a 30-day period. A lot of podcasters don't understand that because they think, oh, well, I'm getting 10,000 downloads per month. And if I'm getting 10,000 downloads per month, then the advertiser would get in front of 10,000 people. But when you're doing embedded or baked in ads, the advertiser is only getting in front of the listeners who are listening to that one episode that advertiser is in. So when you're looking at your metrics, it's important that you go back 30 days to an episode 30 days ago and say, how many downloads did this episode get in a 30-day period? And that's the number that the advertiser cares about when you're doing baked in or embedded ad reads, which means that ad is part of the audio file. And it is in just that one episode. So it's really important that you understand what those numbers mean. And I would really spend some time looking through the numbers. I feel like a lot of times when I talk to podcasts, they'll say, well, I don't even know how to find that, or where's that at? Or, just comments that make me think they haven't obviously really spent any time in their hosting provider looking at their stats if they're not aware of that information. So of course you want to look at your all-time downloads. Like that's a really great number to look at. You want to look at how many downloads you're getting per month. But when it comes to advertisers, if you're doing baked in, they really only care about how many downloads you're getting per episode in a 30-day period. The other thing is that you do need to really know your audience, and that kind of goes in with your numbers, right? Like who is actually listening to your show? And sometimes that can be a little bit tricky to determine in podcasts because the podcast host doesn't necessarily tell you who is listening to your show. So you have to figure out a way to determine what your audience is. And that can be through surveys. That could be through, you have a Facebook group that also is, targeting the same messaging, or social media stats just in general can be good. But know for sure who's listening to your audience, because if you don't know how many and who is listening to your audience, then it's really difficult to sell advertisers on the value of your show. Any questions about that?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So then next we're going to talk about preparing your podcast for advertisers. I think that this is one of the things that I think podcasts fall down on a lot is not formatting their podcast for advertisers. So there's, obviously different ways to do podcast ads. And from my vantage point, what podcasts bring to the marketing industry and advertising industry that other mediums don't bring is a host-read endorsement ad. So when the host receives the product, they try the product out, they like the product, they talk to their audience about it. There's so much influence power in that. And it really goes so much further than a pre-recorded ad. And I know as a podcaster, sometimes it's easy to think, gosh, I wish I could just sign up with somebody who would just automatically put ads in my podcast. Like if you were a YouTuber and YouTube just threw ads in there. But from a listener experience, host-read ads are much more enjoyable. People like host-read ads. Surveys show that 63% of people who listen to podcasts actually don't mind podcast ads. And it's because they know the host has really curated the sponsors they've gone through, and they're only recommending products that their audience will actually really like. I was so shocked when I started in the podcast industry because I expected that podcasters would take every advertiser that came their way. And I cannot tell you the number of times I will bring an advertiser to a podcast and the podcast will say, nope, I'm not interested. I don't like that product. I don't want them on my show. And I think, yeah, but they want to pay you. Isn't that worth it? And they don't. They have spent years nurturing their audience. They have spent years really making sure that they're bringing quality content, and the ad content needs to go along with that as well. If you are one of those super, super creative podcasters and you can figure out a way to weave your ad read into the content of the show, that's awesome. Really, you can only do that in a baked in way. So in my opinion, when you are formatting your podcast, you need to create it with natural breaks to insert ads in it. I think as a podcast listener myself, there's nothing that I dislike more than all of a sudden I'm listening to an ad or I'm listening to a podcast and all of a sudden they're talking about an ad, and I think, whoa, what just happened? So I really believe that you should pay attention to your ad and that you should create natural formatting and programming in your podcast to make sure that ads feel normal. A good way to do this is to work with music beds within your podcast. So you have a transition music that you play throughout the episode, not just during the podcast ads, but throughout the episode so that people get used to hearing that music and it's a nice transition. So think about the formatting of your show and then think about your audience too. Is your audience interested and open to hearing advertisers? And one of the things that always just breaks my heart as a podcast advertising person is when podcasters say, I know, audience, that you don't want to hear these ads. I know they're just bugging you and we just have to do them anyways because they pay the bills. So just put up with it. And I think that's not a very good way to approach advertising, because the reality is that we all like to buy products and services that are going to fit a need in our life. And if you as the host have curated the advertisers that you have and you know that this product is going to benefit you and benefit your audience, you're doing them a service by sharing the product and sharing a discount with them. So really approaching it like that is going to be better for your audience. It's also going to be better for the advertiser, right? Because they're going to get a better return on their investment, and then they're going to want to advertise with you again and again. So any questions or comments about that?
None came in. I was thinking I used to listen to the Tim Ferriss show like years ago. I haven't listened in a long time, and he'd put things on. I was buying all kinds of mushroom coffees and things really from listening to him. Like he would, and exactly what you said. Like I bought so much stuff. It was just dumb. Like, look, I don't listen to him anymore, but it was interesting. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I was going to say, I listened to Pod Save America. I haven't listened to that in a while either, and they kind of make fun of their advertisers, which I thought it just sounds terrible when they're just making fun of them. It's like, it's totally what you said. It kind of defeats the purpose of like, anyway, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Joe Rogan does the same thing a lot, where it's almost like mocking. And I've had advertisers who've been like, I advertised on Joe Rogan's podcast. I'll never do that again. We paid, thousands of dollars for him to mock our product. And I mean, you do you, it's your podcast. And if it works for you and your advertisers are happy with it. But in my opinion, from a listening perspective, if your show is formatted correctly and you do good ad reads, I'm interested in listening, right? So it's all about how you approach your audience and how you approach your sponsors. The other thing I wanted to interject here is that if you are a podcaster that doesn't have advertisers right now and you're thinking that you would like advertisers, I always highly recommend that people start with affiliates, and you can go on affiliate websites and go through and find the companies that you're interested in, create affiliate accounts for them, and then experiment with advertising in your podcast. And I really recommend it for people who have brand new shows, because if you start out the gate with advertisers, it really does help educate your audience that you're always going to have advertisers for them, but that you really have picked great brands for them. And then also it helps with the formatting. It helps in a lot of areas. So I feel like affiliates are a really good way to start with advertisers, to experiment with them. And then it also gives you the feedback of how did your audience respond? Did they like it? Were you seeing conversion? So you could experiment with the ad reads and say, gosh, I know when I included a personal experience, I got way more sales. A lot of times when you're working directly with advertisers, they're not going to tell you how many conversions they got or how many sales they made. They're either just going to say, yeah, it worked and we want to do it again, or no, it didn't work and we don't want to do it again. And so you don't get a lot of feedback. But the nice thing about affiliates is that for sure, because you were paid, a percentage or, a fee when a sale happens. So you can also build up a really good story for yourself about, I marketed this product or I advertised this product and, we were able to get 100 new customers for them or what have you. You can really build up a story with affiliate sponsors. So I think that's a good place to start.
Great. I was going to tell you too that the YouTube stream lags a little bit. So there
okay.
are some comments that I'll throw in here.
Okay.
First was from Special. She said, seriously, that's cool for your listeners or the advertisers, which is true.
I'm sorry, say that again, Mike.
Can you see it on the screen, or can you
No,
not see
I can't see it
because you have your slides
I
up.
just have my slides up.
Special said, seriously, that's not cool for your listeners or the advertisers. She's agreeing with, doing that.
Totally.
And then David said, oh, what do you mean by a break? Leave silence in between your words. So like when you're talking about formatting your show to put it up there, he's asking, what do you mean by a break? Leave silence in between your words?
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so yes, kind of, but I think a lot of times, and especially I'll talk more about dynamic insertion. Sometimes it feels like people take a break, a breath, or it's the end of the sentence. And with dynamic insertion, the ad just comes right in. So in my opinion, think about like the story arcs within your show. And, if you're interviewing people, maybe you have, 3 or 4 different sections of the interview where you always start with this piece and then you kind of wrap that piece up. And then that's a good place for an ad break before you start in the next segment. So, just think about the flow of the content and come to some natural resting periods. If you listen to a lot of the really highly produced shows on like a Gimlet or, some of the big shows where they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce podcasts, there's a really good story arc to all of them. And they all have these places where as a listener, you're still engaged in the content. You still want to hear what comes next, but they weave the ad in a way where it feels like it makes sense instead of feeling like a real interruption. And I think a lot of podcasters, especially podcasters when they're starting out, they just record all of their content in one kind of big, linear line. And then they go back in and they're like, oh, well, it seems like we kind of like, took a pause there. I'll just put an ad break there. Or it seems like I could fit it in there. So I'm going to fit it in there instead of being really intentional about how you're programming your content around the ads so that it feels more comfortable to the listener and it doesn't feel as kind of abrasive or shocking. Does that help clarify?
Well, I think it's great. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was thinking, that's why I asked earlier about formatting it. Like, do you upload it differently? Because are there set times in different hosting services that have ad breaks? Like, is there a certain, the pre-roll and post-roll, but that mid-roll, whatever those are, is that, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, for sure. And I'll cover that a little bit more when I get to the dynamic slide. But yes, there are definitely breaks where you tell the computer, here's where to run an ad.
Okay.
Oh, and here we go. I wasn't sure exactly when that slide was coming next. But
and then one more thing. David says, thank you very, very much. That was very clear. And then Drew, who does run dynamic ads, says, this is great stuff. He has the Sleep With Me podcast. I think you know him, don't you, yes. Drew Ackerman? Yeah.
And at least I know, I don't know if I know you personally, Drew, but I know that I know of your show. So thanks for listening. And
then he also said, I wish I knew all this stuff when I started.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Excellent. Okay. Well,
that's all the questions right now.
Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between evergreen, embedded, and dynamically inserted. So there are baked in, evergreen. Sometimes people use a lot of different terminology for those types of ads. But essentially, when you think about, they call them baked in a lot of times, the ads, because they are part of the audio file. So, let's say you release your show every Thursday, you have an episode coming out this Thursday with an advertiser or maybe several advertisers in that episode. When you create that audio file, the ad is part of that native audio file. You're going to publish that episode and it's going to live forever on what's the date on Thursday? April 29 or April 30th, I think is Thursday. So if I listen to the April 30th ad or episode and you have an ad for ZipRecruiter, I'm going to hear that ad. If in June or July, I listen to the April 30th episode, I'm going to hear that ZipRecruiter ad. So unless you as a podcaster go back in to your hosting provider, take down that audio file, strip out the ZipRecruiter ad, and upload that audio file again, those ads will stay in there indefinitely. Most advertisers want you to have those ads in there for at least 120 days. So it's not like you have to leave them in forever. Usually there's a certain kind of period that defines baked in or evergreen. And, they call them evergreen because the idea is that the ad will stay there. The advertiser is paying to reach the number of listeners you have in a 30-day period for that one episode. So let's say you get 10,000 downloads per episode in a 30-day period, and you're charging a $30 CPM. They would pay $300 for those 10,000 listeners. The trick from an advertising standpoint is you're going to get 10,000 listeners in the first 30 days. But we all know there are lots of people who come back and listen to back catalog episodes. So maybe you get 10,000 in the first 30 days. Maybe you get another 3,000 in 60 days. And then maybe you continue to get 1,000 downloads per month on that episode indefinitely. So the advertiser only paid for 10,000 downloads, but they're getting a lot more. So that's part of the reason that advertisers really like baked in ads, is because you'll hear people say a lot that they have a really strong long tail. So with podcasts, they do tend to be a slower moving marketing vehicle because not everyone listens to your podcast the minute that it goes live. But there's this long tail that does tend to happen where advertisers garner results over, months and sometimes even years. The challenge with that is several. So first of all, you as the podcaster are really getting the short end of the stick because you're only getting paid for the first 10,000 people who listen. The other thing is that you're not getting paid for anybody who's listening to back catalog episodes. So you've got all of this inventory or this content that's going unmonetized unless you monetized it from the very beginning. The other issue is that a lot of times these ads have promo codes associated with them, and often those promo codes are going to expire long before the ad comes down, or if it ever comes down, right? So how many times have we all as podcast listeners listened to a podcast and the ad is obviously outdated, the offer is outdated? So what real good is it actually doing anyone to have an ad that people are listening to that is totally out of context of what's happening in the time that they're listening to the ad? So how dynamic ad insertion works is it takes all of the listens that you've had, all of your back catalog, as well as your current episodes, and instead of you putting the ad in the native file, the computer inserts it for you. So like you had asked, Mike, essentially, let's say you had a 30-minute podcast episode. You might decide that you want like an ad, 2 ads as a pre-roll, or maybe 1 pre-roll and 2 mid-roll spots and a post-roll, right? So you tell the computer, and you do have to put ad markers in every single episode. So when you upload the episode, you tell the computer where to put the ads. And then that file is there with those ad markers indefinitely. You then upload the audio file for the ad separately, and you tell the computer where and when to run that ad. So you give the computer essentially a time frame. So let's say I want to run this ad from May 1st to May 30th, and I want this ad to receive no more than 50,000 downloads. So you can set all kinds of priorities and all kinds of different things with that ad. And so it will get into your back catalog. Will get into your current episodes. You can also go through and say, I don't want any of my current episodes to have this ad. I only want my back catalog to have it. Or you could go through and you could say, that was a special episode. That was my 100th episode. I don't want ads in that one. So you can select which podcasts you want to have ads inserted to and which ones you don't. My recommendation from a forecasting standpoint is that if you are interested in dynamic insertion, it is ideal for you to put ad marks in all of your episodes because it really helps tremendously. So I recommend that. Now, a couple of things to consider with moving to dynamic insertion. One of the things that I say all the time that I think is so important for people to realize is that it doesn't matter when content is created, it matters when it is consumed. How many of us watch YouTube all the time and we watch videos. I listen to meditations almost every morning that happened in 2016 or 2015, because they're the ones that come up. And it doesn't matter when the content is created. It matters when the person is listening to it. And the nice thing about dynamic insertion, as for you as a podcaster, it allows you to monetize your entire catalog, right? So let's say going back to the 10,000 downloads per episode, my experience has been that if you have 10,000 downloads per episode, you typically are probably getting somewhere between 70 and 100,000 downloads per month. So let's say say you're getting 100,000 downloads per month. Well, now instead of selling your ads for $300 a piece, you can sell them for $3,000 a piece, which is obviously much more substantial. Your advertiser also has the opportunity to reach 100,000 people instead of 10,000 people. What I find really interesting is that there are a lot of direct response agencies who have been in the space who do a lot of the podcast ad buying, and they have been really reluctant to move to this model. But when I go direct and I work with advertisers direct advertisers love dynamic insertion. And the reason is they have more control. They know for sure when the ad's going to run. They know the content, right? They know that this ad is going to be current because I'm running the ad for right now. Think about how many of these COVID, we're all in this together ads we're hearing right now. What happened if, as an advertiser, you put a we're all in this together COVID-19 ad to run right now and it's baked in, and a year from now, I hear that ad? Is that going to make me feel good as a consumer? Like, I probably am not going to want to remember that COVID-19 happened, or, having control as an advertiser and making sure that that content is current, that those promo codes are current. There's a ton of leverage and opportunity. I really believe as an industry that we are headed in the direction of everything going to dynamic ad insertion. It's not super black and white. It is a little bit complicated. The other big thing for podcasters to know is, like, let's say you're on Libsyn and you're paying $20 a month for your Libsyn subscription. If you go to Libsyn Pro, it starts at $100 per month. And then there's also a bandwidth fee that's charged, on there. So it can take your hosting from $20 a month to $1,500 a month, depending on the size of your audience. But if you were getting that in ad revenue back, it's well worth it. And the other opinion that I take is that you're doing the work now and setting yourself up for tomorrow. So if you go into it and you make sure that you're doing it right now, in a year, in 2 years, as you continue to produce your podcast, it's really going to be positioned to become something that can actually really generate a significant amount of money for you in ad revenue. This, I think, is interesting. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this was from the IAB. Again, the Interactive Advertising Bureau put this out. And I looked today to see if I could find numbers that were more updated, but this is revenue by delivery mechanism from 2017 to 2018. So you can see that in 2017, about 60% of ads were baked in and about 40% of them were dynamically inserted. And then in 2018, about 49% of them were dynamically inserted and 51.2% were embedded. And I don't know what the number is for 2019 or 20, but my guess is that that's continuing to grow because there are so many networks that are moving to dynamic insertion. Any questions about that? I mean, this is a complicated topic, and I could talk about it for quite a long time, but I will stop myself there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And since I have a microphone, I can ask it right away. Do you think the dynamic ads costs for hosting will come down? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, because now you said it's very expensive to do. But then my other question was, so if someone's listening to this right now and they have a podcast and they're hearing you and they're thinking, oh, put markers in there, what's that look like? Is that in your DAW? Is that in your your Adobe Audition, whatever you're using? Are you marking it there? How do you mark it?
That's a really good question. So you mark the episode in your hosting provider. So your hosting provider is the one that's going to be inserting the ad for you. So you, and Every hosting provider is a little bit different. We work a lot with Libsyn. We also work a lot with Art19 and Megaphone. Those three, I think, in my opinion, really are doing a good job in this space right now. So if you are thinking about moving to dynamic insertion, those are a few of my favorites. I know that there are a lot of other companies out there that, Captivate and Simplecast, where I know that they're adding in dynamic ad insertion. Blueberry just added dynamic insertion, little clunky. But
what was the third one you said? You said it was Libsyn, Art19, and
Megaphone.
Oh, and Megaphone. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Art19 and Megaphone really are more enterprise level hosting providers, but there are some workarounds where you can, join some networks or different people that are using those platforms if you're interested in getting in to one of those. But so every hosting provider, really, there are a ton of nuances that go along with how to set dynamic ad insertion up. And it's very complicated because you have to give the computer the right instructions, right? So it's like you put the right instructions out in, you're going to get the right result out, but it's making sure that you understand the platform. Like, for instance, we were on a call with Libsyn yesterday and found out that all of their system is run off of Greenwich, or I'm going to say it wrong, but the
time.
Yes, exactly. So European time, right? So that means that makes a big difference if you're not setting up the time, if you're thinking, oh, it's a Pacific Standard Time, but actually it's 8 hours ahead of you, so there are just different nuances that can be a little bit complicated, but you do run everything. So the ad insertion points and everything would go through your hosting provider.
Okay, so then, my question was kind of like, let's say there's somebody listening right now and they have this podcast they're doing, and should they be preparing for that, in it? So then, and then where would they put the markers? I mean, is it kind of general in the different hosting services? There's a mid roll, and there is the where the pre and post are going to be, but then the mid roll, where would do some have more than one mid roll too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
is that I don't, because you said they do it differently. So is it
I think that's a really valid question. So first of all, I would say all of the hosting providers give you the ability to automatically put in a pre-roll and a post-roll with the click of a button. The negative about that is that means that when somebody pushes play on your podcast, the very first thing they're going to hear is an ad.
That's bad.
I'm never a fan of it. No. So I would say the hardest thing about moving to dynamic ad insertion is that you have to go into your back catalog and you have to mark all of your episodes. So, we're working with a show right now, Switching, and they've been podcasting since 2014. They've got a ton of back catalog episodes, right? So it takes a really long time to go through those shows. And so if you're thinking of switching to dynamic insertion, essentially what you would want to do is go through your back catalog. You would want to strip out old ads that you had, and then that's where you would put the ad marker. So if you already did an ad, let's say at minute, 10.15, then that's where you would put the ad marker. If you are not ready to move to dynamic insertion right now, but you want to prepare your show for it, what I would recommend is that you take note in each episode of where the ad markers should go. Again, kind of getting back to that natural rhythm of your show, of the formatting of your show. When you're producing it, you say, oh, right there at minute 20, that's the right spot for an ad. And then if you note episode 75, that insertion point needs to go at minute 20, then you know where to put it. And then you can stack them up, right? So you could do 3 mid-roll ads back to back in that one spot. So you could do a pre-roll with Drew with Sleep With Me. I'm sure he does his ads at the very beginning of the podcast, right? So he could do 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 ads at the very beginning of the show. I'm not sure how many he puts there, but you can stack up the ad insertion. So you can do multiple ad insertion points with multiple ad reads. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. And it's interesting about Drew's. He says kind of the same thing on every one. I was listening to that. He says, hey, everybody. He says, hey, everybody, every time.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to it I was showing somebody else about that. And I thought that's interesting. The other thing I thought was interesting about the dynamic ads is that Sean Howard spoke last week, And he has the Alba Salix, the Fable and Folly. He talked about Patreon. And on his shows, he had an opening too that said something about COVID, but it's a dynamic. He uses Art19, but it was something nice. And I know that Drew does that too. I think Drew does that.
Yep. And you make a good point too.
I always fall asleep in Drew's.
The good part about dynamic ad insertion is that you can set it up so that instead of, I have a podcaster that we work with, instead of her having her intro be part of her native audio file, her intro is inserted dynamically. So that means with a click of a button, she could go in and change the intro to all of her podcasts. Right?
Wow.
You could listen to one from 2 years ago and it's got a current intro, right?
And that's amazing. And I was thinking that too with my client. I work with associations. So I was thinking they could push their events on all of them. Like that was the thought down the line is I think I've even talked to you about this in the past of I'd like to be able to push them to that, but of course they start out that's why I kind of also asking the questions about for people that have new podcasts. It's kind of mind bending to think okay, I just started this thing, should I have these markers in here or something that I know? And then one other question is how do you so I keep going back to the markers, but it's do you have a spreadsheet saying, okay, this show, it's this, and that's, and then you just, when you upload them all to this, you go in and okay.
And so and the best thing to do is really to pay an editor. I've talked to lots of editors about it. And, you of course can do it yourself. It's not time consuming. I had a show that converted, I can't remember. I think they had 100 episodes and she's like, I think it took me 8 hours to do, but she's like, it's pretty mindless if you know exactly where the markers go. So, it's not difficult. It's just time consuming. But I would say I really believe wholeheartedly that you're doing yourself a disadvantage if you don't go into podcasting with the aspirations of moving to dynamic ad insertion at some point. So if you can keep track of all of that data as you go, then when you're a year in and you're like, hey, I've got 50,000 downloads a month, I'm ready to move to this. Or really, I feel like it makes sense in my book to move to dynamic insertion when you get around the 20,000 download per month mark, because then it's okay, you're talking about some relatively some money, it's going to cover the hosting fee upgrade and it's going to make you more money. So that's kind of in my book where the cutoff is. But if if you're getting to a place, and I'm a big proponent of start with the end in mind, right? Think about what you're trying to create for your podcast and what you want it to be eventually, instead of creating something where don't think too small, right? Think big. Think about what is the best version of the show you're creating and what it could look like eventually, and then start with that. And if you start with that in mind, then you'll be poised to take advantage of opportunities as they arise.
Yeah. A couple people said a few things. They said, thank you. That was very, oh no, we already said that. Special said, wow, that's super cool. And then David said, yeah, I like that. I don't know where those came from. I'm sorry.
No problem.
But I just wanted to call out that they are saying things. But go ahead. Sorry, I should let you keep going off.
No. So dynamic ad insertion, like I said, I could talk about it more, and there are definitely, there are always questions that people have about it. I am on LinkedIn a lot, and I've definitely created some stuff around dynamic insertion, but you can also talk to your hosting provider about it. Even just scheduling a call with your hosting provider and saying, hey, I want to learn more about dynamic ad insertion is a really good place to start, because then they can talk specifically about their platform and what you need to do to set it up. But very, very big proponent of dynamic ad insertion.
Yeah. The one thing I hear when I hear all this, so I had a podcast that I started in 2006 for my old company, and I did it weekly for 10 years. And I had 500 and something, and I just deleted them all because I don't have that company anymore. And I keep thinking, I should have kept all those. I don't know if I'd want to go back in, but it's all about the events and stuff. But
right. Anyway. That's right. I forgot about that, Mike. I think when I first talked to you, you were still doing that show.
Yeah. And the day that I stopped doing it was a fantastic day because it was so much work.
Yep.
Yeah. But anyway, but please go ahead. Yeah. There's so much. This is such an interesting topic.
It really is. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and talk now about pricing your podcast. And I guess, kind of keeping in the vein of dynamic ad insertion, people often will ask me, do you price differently for dynamic than you do for embedded? And the answer is maybe, but we do as an agency tend to price the same for dynamic and for embedded. And I haven't really gotten any pushback from it. So I always encourage people to go in at a higher price than maybe what you might feel comfortable with, because you can always go down, but you can never go up, right? And in terms of kind of just standard pricing in the industry, really, like if you look at it, it's typically between $20 and $50 CPM or cost per thousand. So, in the examples I had given before, if you're reaching 10,000 people and you're charging a $30 CPM, that would be 300. If you're looking at dynamic, then it would be 3,000. If you're getting 100,000. One of the things that people also ask about dynamic a lot is, let's say you have 3 ad spots in your podcast, you have a pre-roll and 2 mid-rolls. You can only sell 3 advertisers for a month period because they're buying the downloads for a month instead of per episode. So from a workload perspective, a lot of times dynamic ad insertion is less work for you, the podcaster, as well, because you only have to have 3 ads. But let's say you're charging $3,000 a piece for 3 advertisers. That can be some substantial income. But yeah, so I would say as an industry are still very kind of based on the cost per thousand. And if you are going to be out there selling your show and you've never done it before, just think about in your mind, if this advertiser were to pay to reach 1,000 of your listeners, or if they were to pay to reach 1,000 people on Facebook, or if they were paid to, email 1,000 people, how much are they paying for that? And so that's what the advertiser is looking at, is how much money does it cost for them to reach 1,000 people? And that's why it's important. If you are a podcaster that is selling your show yourself, you're not working with any sort of an agency or a rep firm, I highly recommend that you look at package pricing. So a lot of times, especially for smaller shows, a CPM model might not make sense. So let's say you're only getting 1,000 downloads per episode. Are you really going to sell that for $20? I mean, nobody wants to pay $20 to run an ad, and you don't want to make $20 for, the running of an ad. So really, it makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, to package it up with things like social media posts and newsletter inclusion, maybe a banner ad on your website and a podcast ad. And when you go to somebody like that, number one, it's going to extend your reach, right? So you're going to reach more people than just the people listening to your podcast ad. But also it gives you that leverage to charge more. So you could put together a package and say, well, for $1,000, you're going to get X number of things. And that really is a good way of selling, especially if you're going to be doing it on a one-on-one basis. And then I have on there, you can deliver more than just a podcast ad. If that's all you have, if you don't have any social media or newsletter or a website or any of that, then obviously you're handicapped somewhat. But if you have those other assets, I really recommend, especially if you're selling yourself, independently, that you package those items together. Any questions about that?
Well, I wanted to kind of roll it back a little bit. I'm going to two things. David said it. I like the idea of being able to change all the intros across the board. Sorry, these are late because
no problem.
Lags. Being able to add it dynamically a year from now, if I want to. Would there be any charge for it if it's not advertising? So they're going to change that intro.
Yeah. So there are companies like Podbean, for instance, that I know is one of them, where their monthly hosting fee is less to do dynamic insertion, but they also charge you a CPM on top of it. So I think Podbean's like $1 or $2. I don't know. I'm probably quoting that totally wrong. But so, let's say where Libsyn is going to charge you $100 a month plus a bandwidth fee. Maybe a Podbean might charge you $100, but then they charge you a $1 CPM for every dynamic ad insertion that you use. If you are going with a service like that, then absolutely you will pay. They don't care if it's an ad or if it's a promo or if it's an intro or whatever. they're charging you to use that dynamic feature. So they don't care what content you're inserting. But if you go with a company that just has a flat fee, like an Art19 or Megaphone or Libsyn, I think Omni Studios also is a good option. All of those are just flat fees as far as I know. Not 100% sure on Omni, but I know for Art19 and Megaphone and Libsyn, they're all just, you pay a certain amount and then you could do half your show could be dynamically inserted content. So they don't care because you're paying like a flat fee. So it just depends. But then that gets back to understanding your hosting provider and making sure you're choosing a company that's a really good fit for your goals.
Right. And then Esteban said, this is all very fascinating. I do not have ads in my podcast, but this info helps me understand a little more about podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis.
Yes. And it's really interesting once you understand dynamic insertion, because you'll be listening to a show and you'll be like, that was a dynamically inserted ad. Like it's interesting because you shouldn't be able to tell. And one of the things that I did miss about dynamic insertion that I always like to harp on is they are still host read ads. So a lot of times people hear dynamic insertion and they think that it means a pre-produced ad, that you're going to get a Starbucks produced ad that's going to run in your show. And not to say that those aren't opportunities out there, because there are companies that are selling those types of ads. But I still really, really believe in the value of the host read ad and the value of the influence that a host read ad brings. And you absolutely could and should do dynamically inserted ads from a host read perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say too is like, when you were saying selling your show, I was thinking about, again, by some of my clients, the associations, they have such a niche that they don't have many lists. I mean, they may have 600 downloads, but those are niche, and they are worth a lot of money to those people. It's like, I love that you said, how much would a Facebook ad or a thing, but even on top of that, it's like, hey, what is that worth it to you? Gotta think about it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, you totally have to think about that. And that's why it is really important for you to know your audience. Yeah. What I have found is that if you have more of a broad-based show, so let's say maybe you're doing like a business show or a sports show or a comedy show or something where, of course, you have like some identified demographic, but really anybody could listen to it and be happy with your content and be entertained. The nice part about that is that you can grow a bigger audience, right? The downside of it is that it's more of your audience is more of a commodity. Whereas if, like you're saying, Mike, if you're reaching association owners or, if you're reaching, I worked with a show for a while where they reached government contractors. Well, we charged a ton for that show because it's really hard to reach government contractors.
Right.
And so depending on who your show targets, especially when we're talking about pricing, it can be as much as your market is willing to pay. The other thing that is, certainly a moving target right now is that with COVID-19, there is more inventory. We certainly have sustained some cancellations. And there are companies like Away that, suitcases that did a ton of advertising. And then, of course, they've pulled back. No one's buying suitcases right now. But then on the flip side, we have companies like HelloFresh or meal delivery companies where they're getting so much business that they're pulling back all their ads because they can't handle the business they're getting. So, yeah, there is definitely some fluctuation happening in the space right now in terms of pricing. So I do think depending on where you're at, you have to be really cognizant of what is appropriate to price out the ads. And again, I always go in with, hey, this is where we're at. Gauge the customer, or the potential advertiser and see if they're going to give you any feedback or pushback on the price. And sometimes they don't give you any pushback and then you're good. And then other times they'll be like, well, gosh, this seems high. And then you can obviously negotiate down from there.
One question from David. He says, also, I plan on launching soon. I think having an advert in my first episode would help me sound more established and professional.
Totally.
How can I approach that process? Affiliate, like Audible or Pimsleur?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a company called Influencer Bridge that is a company that specifically specializes in affiliate opportunities for podcasters. So I would recommend them. I met a woman at a recent event I was at that worked for AWeber, and they have an affiliate program for podcasts. So definitely tap into affiliates, because I think that that's the best way to start if you, especially out the gate, if you're brand new, is to start with those affiliate partnerships. But and there is a lot of affiliate opportunities out there for bloggers. So you could look at those types of resources too. I don't think any of them care how you get the message out, if you get it out on social media or on your blog or on your podcast. But like I said, Influencer Bridge is a company specifically designed for podcasts. So if you just Google Influencer Bridge, you'll find that information.
That's very cool. When I was doing the meetings podcast, I used to make up ads and put them in there. Like I would make up, like the Prairie Home Companion, and I'd listen to he would do catch up, and they talk, So I used to do event escalators, because you want your keynote speaker to be relaxed. So there were escalators to get you up on the stage. And I did all these silly things, but now looking back on that would have been good places to pop in real commercials, in between. And David says that it's well, maybe just have some commercials. You could, do your own.
can
you do that? Could you do
absolutely.
Coca-Cola? Hey.
For a brand, you could, but the reality is that if you are going to lead your people to, your audience, something, you might as well get compensated. The other good is that if you have a service or a product that you're personally offering, I think that it's not a bad idea to make ads for your products, right? So, if you personally have a big event coming up, whether that be in person or virtual, if you've got a course that you're trying to sell, if you've got, an ebook or a physical book or whatever, you can also use those spaces to push your product, which can be good.
Right. Great advice.
So,
I have a question, but it's not really about this.
But
no
problem.
There was a guy who spoke a while back, David Shapiro, and he buys podcasts for his podcast on other podcasts.
Yes, it's a great way to grow your audience.
Yeah, but I don't know if the cost for that is. I don't know. He had it all figured out. How much it would take him to sell advertising for how many more ads he had. It was pretty. He's a real smart guy, nice guy, really great guy.
But what's his podcast or podcast?
Martech podcast. Yeah,
I'll have to
yeah,
check that out.
Guy. Yeah. But he had a whole system of how to do that, which I thought was amazing.
Right. I actually was thinking about starting a section of our company specifically dedicated to that, because in my opinion, the reality is, and we have the podcast consumer report that's going to be coming out from Edison Research very soon. So we'll have a deeper understanding of how podcast listenership is growing. But from my vantage point, with the current stats we have, only about 30 to maybe 40% of the population are actively listening to podcasts. So that means that when you are trying to grow an audience, if you're running social media ads, or if you're emailing a list that you currently have, or any sort of outreach mechanism that you've got in place, that means essentially 60 to 70% of the people who are getting that message are not active podcast listeners. So I know we love to throw out the stats that 70% of America listens to podcasts, but those are not serious listeners, right? We want to reach the people who are really avid podcast listeners, and that's a small percentage of people. If you advertise on a podcast, podcast listeners listen to podcasts. So it's one of the best ways to grow your audience. And whether that's getting interviewed, which I think is becoming increasingly difficult because there are so many people who are like, I'll just get interviewed for free on all these podcasts. But interviews are great ways. And then doing ads on other podcasts are really good. The third way that we see happening a lot, Wondery in particular specializes in doing feed drops. So what a feed drop is that you essentially would ask another podcast to do a bonus episode. So they would create a bonus episode. The host would create a small, trailer for it where they say something like, We've got a podcast called Motivate Me that's going to be running some of these. So you might come on and say, Motivate Me is this great show that Dean just started, and it gives you daily inspirational bits about how to stay motivated and centered. And I wanted to share this episode with you. And then they might either play a 5-minute or 10-minute kind of bit from your podcast on their RSS feed. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really powerful way to introduce your content to somebody who already has an established audience. And then the cool thing about that is usually those feed drops only stay in the feed for 30 days. And then at the end of 30 days, you were charged based on how many people actually downloaded that episode. Oh, wow. So you're not usually going to get as many, let's say you're typically getting 10,000 downloads per episode. For a feed drop, you're not usually going to get 10,000. Maybe you might get, somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 people who download it. But hey, that's a really powerful way to grow your audience.
Great. Special said, I love when people make their own ads for small businesses they love, and you can approach them. Can approach them. Yeah.
That is awesome. Yeah. So I just have one more slide to kind of wrap us up here. Actually, I think I've got 2, but I'll make it kind of quick. So if you're thinking about, going the next step in trying to cultivate advertisers for your podcast, I recommend that you put together some sort of a media kit. And, a media kit, if you've never, been around it, might sound a bit intimidating. And really, it's not. It's essentially just information about your podcast. It can be one sheet, it can be multiple sheets. It just depends on how you want to design it. It should look nice. So graphically, it should be appealing so that when, potential advertisers are looking at it, they're excited about partnering with you. And, I recommend, in that media kit that you talk about your podcast, you talk about your audience, you talk about the host of the show, you talk about your reach. So how many people are they actually going to reach? How many downloads are you getting? And then you also put in any pricing or packaging that you have. So essentially you want that media kit to be a really good snapshot of what an advertiser could expect to find on your show. And of course, typically in this day and age, it's going to be a PDF or some digital file that you could email them. So if you can, put links to different things in there, you could list your social reach, you could list, your newsletter if they're going to be included in that. But having a solid media kit is a really good first step, because when you reach out to potential advertisers, the first thing they're going to say is, well, send me some information. And if you don't have any information to send them, then you're left kind of going, oh no, now what? Now what do I send them? So make sure that you create some sort of a media kit for yourself. And then, in terms of outreach, there are lots and lots of businesses that are a good fit for podcast advertising. I do usually say it's ideal if you can find companies that sell nationwide. So whether it's a company that's selling on a website, whether it's a company that's just sold in a national retailer, software products and apps work really well for podcasts. But something that, if we live here in California, but you've got a listener in New York City, you want them to have the ability to purchase the product that you're talking about, unless you've got a really regionalized podcast. But by and large, most podcasts are reaching the nation, and of course, even lots of different parts of the world. So make sure the advertisers are a product that your audience can really benefit from. And then it's important when you're outreaching to potential advertisers to try and find the person who's in charge of marketing. A lot of times, the info ats or the help at or even PR or media at, those tend to just go in junk folders. And I've in my career not gotten really, I don't know if I've ever even gotten one response back from those sorts of emails that I've sent. So if you can go on LinkedIn, let's say you find a company that you really like, almost all of the marketing people that you would want to find are on LinkedIn. So go on LinkedIn, find the marketing person for the company that you're interested in, and then see if you can figure out the kind of syntax of their email address, because every company has a certain structure to their email address that is going to be the same every time. So whether that's first name at company, or whether that's first initial dot last name at company, whatever it is, that's a really good way of coming up with an email address for somebody. You can also message people on LinkedIn. I really have gotten a good response from messaging people on LinkedIn. Or you can comment on a company's social posts, right? So if you're following them on their social media and you're actively engaging in the content they're creating, then you can also put a comment in there about how, hey, I messaged you and I've got a good opportunity I want to talk to you about. That can be a good way to sometimes to get through to decision makers. But outreach is really important, and you just have to be consistent and persistent with your outreach if you really are interested in getting advertisers for your show. Any questions about that?
Nope.
Okay. So then lastly, I just wanted to talk about how to sell ads on your podcast. So as I mentioned, you can personally go and sell your podcast. And I really believe that if you're a smaller show, you are the best advocate for your podcast. And I know a lot of times if it's not something you've done before, it can feel uncomfortable to approach people, but you know what you're creating better than anyone else does. And because it's not super large, you're going to be able to get a better price for it than someone else can. An example would be for True Native Media. We're currently representing about 65 different podcasts. So if I go out to an advertiser and I say, hey, I've got these 10 parenting podcasts, and this one is a $200 CPM because they're getting 2,000 downloads. And this one is a $25 CPM because they're getting 20,000 downloads. It's really hard for the advertiser to make sense of that. Why would they want to pay a much higher CPM for one podcast than they are for another? So when you're looking at working with a representation firm, they're going to create standard pricing that they need you to fall within. And if you're a smaller show, there could be a ton of value in the content you're creating. There can be a ton of value in the audience that you can deliver, but you are going to be the best ambassador for that. A representation firm is not going to do you justice as a smaller show. So if you're in a position where you're just growing your audience, but you're really interested in getting advertisers, I recommend that you personally go out and try to solicit advertisers. You are passionate about what you're creating. You know it. You can represent it well. When you get more to kind of the mid-level, a representation firm can be a great option. There are companies like True Native Media, our company that represent podcasts. There are also companies like Audio Boom and Acast and, a whole selection. There's Podcorn. There's all kinds of new companies coming up every day who are willing to represent your show. So there are definitely opportunities. And then there's kind of online, listings. So I think actually like Podcorn probably falls more in that category, AdvertiseCast, where you can just go on and create your own profile. One of the things that I always tell people or podcasters to consider when you are looking at outside representation is if you are one of thousands of shows that company is representing, are you really going to be represented well or to the best of that company's ability? So we at True Native Media try to be more boutique and specialize, and we are very selective about the shows that we represent. But when we decide to represent a show, we're going to give that show more attention than a large, company would that has thousands of different shows on their platform. So, think about that. And then lastly, if you're really interested in monetizing your show, but you don't want to work with a rep firm and you don't want to sell ads personally, you can always hire someone, right? You could hire a salesperson for your company to go and sell advertising for the content you've created. So those are kind of the different routes that you can go down to get advertisers on your show.
Very cool. Blythe had a question.
Yeah.
Blythe says, do advertisers pay before or after the insertion is complete?
That's a really good question. So it's important to discuss terms with the advertiser when you are signing the contract. So you should have a media kit, but you should also have an advertising contract. And that's something that you could Google. I also, when we were drawing our contracts up, I worked with, I think it's rocketlawyer.com. It was like $40 for them to help me put a contract together. So really affordable, but have a contract created and then put your payment terms in that. So if you need payment in advance of the ad run, then put that in there. And, knock on wood, when I was in radio ad sales, when I was in newspaper ad sales, it was very common for people to not pay their bills. And as a salesperson, collections was part of our job, where we got to go in and say, you need to pay your ad bill. I need money, but I have yet in 4 years to have one advertiser not pay for ads that they have run. So I don't necessarily think it's a huge deal to have them pay in advance unless it's really important to you. One consideration point is that they're also taking a gamble on you as the advertiser or as the podcaster that you're actually going to run the ads that are contracted to run. And we certainly, unfortunately, have worked with podcasts in the past where we'll have scheduled ads for them to run. They're supposed to run an ad. They don't run the ad. And then I say, how come you didn't run the ad? And they go, oh yeah, I just forgot about it. Or that didn't make it in, or they just don't produce a podcast episode that week. Right. Which is always fun. But anyways, so, I think that there's a gamble on both sides, and you just have to decide as a podcaster what's most important to you. But I would say it's very common to extend 30 days, net terms to an advertiser.
Do you have any more slides?
I don't. No, that's the end.
Oh, great. Okay, so put that one up. Yeah, people can see that. I was going to say, you haven't seen these little names come up, so I wanted you to see that because I think it's very cool.
Yeah, but you want me to? I can exit out of this so I can actually see everything.
The next question was from. Oh, then I'll take that away. Let's go right here like this. Look at that. Boom. This is what it looked like. Sorry. So David. So David says, what's the average annual earnings from ads by podcasters? Or can you talk a bit on the numbers, please?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. And I think, a lot of people start podcasts wanting to make it their living, right? And so it can be kind of challenging sometimes to determine, can you make a living from it? And, I hate to answer like this, but it really depends a lot on your audience size, on the people that you're reaching. So, we have shows that have made over $100,000 in a year, selling ads, and even more than that. I mean, this year we've got some larger shows that we're working with, which is exciting, that, we're hoping to do hundreds of thousands of dollars in ad sales for them. So, but you're also talking, these are shows that are getting 500,000 plus downloads per month. So it depends a lot on the size of your show. I would say, depending on what you wanted to make, if you can get your show to about, even I would say probably 50,000 downloads per episode, or, around that 100,000 download per episode, or monthly number, if you're going to do dynamic insertion. For most people, I mean, obviously this is California. Cost of living is a little bit more expensive here. But if you're making, $9,000 a month, that's usually pretty decent for most people. So.
Cool. And then let's see. Garrett says, excellent information. Thank you. Is there any ballpark for how much representation firms charge?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the standard, I would say currently we charge 30%. So the podcaster keeps 70%, we keep 30%. And I don't know 100% what all the different representation firms charge or take, but most of them are in that 30% range is what I hear. When I talk to people, they always say, oh yeah, that's what the other company told me too. So 30%, I would say, is a pretty fair number.
Yeah, Garrett has a podcast, and Sabrina, his wife, they do it about dinosaurs. It's called I Know Dino.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. They're great people. And then Blythe says, thank you.
Thank you guys. This has been so much fun to talk about podcast advertising. And I think that there is so much opportunity in podcasts. It's one of the only mediums out there where there's so much content that is created that's not monetized and with advertising. And there is so much opportunity. And the cool thing, I started the company 4 years ago. When I first started, I called companies that were like, what's a podcast? Or, oh yeah, I watched a podcast last week. I was like, no, that wouldn't be a podcast, But now when I reach out to companies, so many people are like, oh yeah, I want to learn more about podcast advertising. And so it's just such a great time to be in this industry.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, Heather. It's been fun.
Having me.
Yeah. I think probably we all have to go to bed and get ready for our next Groundhog Day. That's what I've been calling it, because it's like I do the same thing every day now. Though I did go grocery shopping today. Let's see. Special says, she says, this was great. Thank you so much. Special says, and then Esteban says, very informative. Thank you. So
thank you guys.
People are very happy. Oh, and David too. He said, thanks, very helpful. So cool.
Thanks. And if you guys are interested, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So you can find me, Heather Osgood, on LinkedIn. You can also find us at truenativemedia.com. And if you have specific questions I can answer, you're also welcome to just email me at heather@truenativemedia.com. And I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Yeah. And I'll put all her information up, contact information, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
The Facebook group, you should join the Facebook group. And then just if you want, you don't have to, but that's where stuff is. And then, and you can always email me. I'll send you Heather stuff too.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Heather. Have a wonderful evening.
Yeah. Thank you guys too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Mike McCallan signing off.